The old pine trees of the Blackwood forest stood like silent, watchful giants, their branches weaving a canopy so thick that the sun only ever managed to sprinkle tiny coins of light onto the ground below. At the very edge of this vast, whispering wood, where the wild things began and the town's courage ended, sat a small, sturdy cabin made of logs and stone. This was where Holly lived, a young woman whose life was as quiet and steady as the smoke curling from her chimney. She was a creature of simple habits, content with the hum of her kettle and the rustle of pages in her books. The people in the distant town thought she was brave or perhaps a little strange for living so close to the forbidden trees, but Holly felt a peace there that she found nowhere else. She knew the old stories, of course, the ones told in hushed voices about the great wolves with eyes like molten gold that roamed the deep parts of the forest, wolves that were far too clever and far too large to be normal. She was wise enough to respect the woods, but she had never felt a fear that kept her up at night. That changed on a cool autumn evening as the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Holly was washing her dinner plate, looking out her small window over the sink, when a flicker of movement caught her eye. It was not a deer or a raccoon. There, between the thick trunks of two ancient oaks, was a pair of eyes. They were not the glowing gold from the stories, but a soft, solemn gray, and they belonged not to a beast but to a boy. He was small and looked terribly thin, his clothes little more than tatters, and his dark hair was a messy nest. He stood perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. He did not look dangerous. He looked lost and hungry, a wild little creature who had wandered too far from his den. Holly's first instinct was to lock her door. But as she watched him, she saw the way his shoulders hunched against the chill, the slight tremble in his frame. He was just a child. Taking a deep breath, she moved slowly, not wanting to scare him away. She had made a large pot of beef stew for dinner, rich with carrots and potatoes. She ladled a generous portion into a large, sturdy bowl. She opened her cabin door just enough to step onto the porch, the wooden planks cool beneath her bare feet. The boy tensed, his gray eyes widening, but he didn't run. Holly placed the steaming bowl on the top step. "It's for you," she said softly, her voice sounding too loud in the evening quiet. "It's hot. Be careful." Then she went back inside, closed the door and watched through the window. For a long minute nothing happened. The boy remained a statue in the shadows. Then, with a cautiousness that spoke of a life lived on edge, he crept forward. He moved with a strange, silent grace, barely disturbing a single leaf. He reached the steps, his eyes darting from the cabin door back to the bowl. He snatched it up, and with one last look at the window, he vanished back into the forest as quickly as he had appeared. The next night, as dusk began to settle, Holly found herself looking out the window again. And there he was, in the exact same spot, those same gray eyes watching her. This time she felt less fear and more a pang of sadness. She warmed up the last of the stew and repeated her ritual, placing the bowl on the step and retreating inside. Again he emerged to claim it. This became their unspoken agreement, their secret under the darkening sky. Every evening she would cook a little extra, and every evening he would appear like a little ghost to eat it. She started calling him Ash, for his eyes were the color of wood ash after a fire has gone cold. Weeks turned into months, and the routine continued as the leaves turned to fire and then fell, carpeting the ground. Ash never spoke a single word, but he began to linger a little longer. Sometimes he would sit on the bottom step to eat instead of running off. Once, Holly saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips after a particularly good batch of rabbit pie. She grew fiercely fond of her quiet boy, her heart aching with a protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed. She wondered where he came from, who had left him to fend for himself in these dangerous woods. She tried to ask him gentle questions, but he would only look at her with those deep, knowing eyes and offer a slow blink before disappearing. One night, a different kind of danger came. A large black bear, lean and hungry from its impending winter sleep, ambled out of the trees, its nose in the air, drawn by the scent of the fresh bread Holly had just baked. It lumbered towards her cabin, a low grumble echoing in its chest. Holly, who had been about to put Ash's food out, froze in terror, her hand on the doorknob. This was a real threat, a solid, powerful animal that could easily break down her door. But before she could even scream, a new presence arrived. It moved so fast it was barely a blur. A wolf, massive and powerful, emerged from the shadows between the pines. It was enormous, the largest animal Holly had ever seen, its fur a deep, rich brown like the forest soil. It stood between Holly's cabin and the bear, its body low to the ground, a deep, rumbling growl coming from its chest that vibrated through the very air. The bear, surprised and outmatched, hesitated for a moment before turning and crashing back into the undergrowth, its courage broken. Holly stood paralyzed, her breath caught in her throat. The stories were true. The giant wolf was real and it was standing right in her yard. She should have been terrified, but as the wolf slowly turned its great head to look at her, a strange thing happened. Its eyes were not gold. They were a sharp, intelligent, and unmistakable gray. The exact same shade as ashes. The wolf looked at her, and in its gaze she saw no wild fury, only a fierce, protective intensity. And in her chest, a new feeling bloomed, a warm, pulling sensation, like an invisible thread had been tied around her heart and was gently tugging her forward. The wolf took one step closer, its gaze never leaving hers, and let out a soft, almost questioning chuff. Then, it turned and melted back into the blackness of the trees, leaving Holly alone on her porch, her heart hammering not just from fear, but from a bewildering and thrilling confusion. The quiet boy, the giant wolf, the pull in her chest, none of it made any sense, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that her quiet life was over. The world, for Holly, had tilted on its axis. The familiar comfort of her cabin felt like a distant memory, the four walls now seeming more like a cage than a shelter. Sleep was a futile pursuit that night. Every time she closed her eyes she saw them, the solemn gray eyes of the quiet, hungry boy and the fierce, identical gray eyes of the colossal wolf. They were a puzzle, two pieces that should not possibly fit together, and yet they did, creating a picture that was both terrifying and mystifying. The strange, warm pull in her chest, that invisible tether that had connected her to the beast, had not faded. It hummed within her, a constant, low-level awareness that something fundamental had changed. She spent the dark hours staring at the ceiling, listening to the forest sounds that now seemed to carry new meanings, new whispers. The following evening arrived with a heavy, expectant silence. The sky was a blanket of deep indigo, the first brave stars pricking through the velvet. Holly moved through her kitchen like a ghost, her actions automatic. She prepared the meal as always, a hearty venison stew, but her hands trembled as she ladled it into the familiar bowl. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She kept glancing out the window, but the space between the two oaks remained empty. Ash did not come. The disappointment was a physical ache, a cold knot in her stomach. Had she scared him away? Had the wolf, his protector, told him to stay away from the human woman? Just as a profound sadness began to settle over her, she saw a shift in the shadows. It was not the small, slight form of the boy. It was a larger, denser shadow, moving with a powerful, deliberate grace. The giant wolf emerged from the tree line and stood at the very edge of her yard, its head lowered, its gaze fixed on her cabin. It did not approach, it did not growl. It simply waited. The warm pull in Holly's chest flared into a blazing heat, so strong it stole her breath. It was an undeniable force, a magnetic draw that made her fingers itch to reach out. This was not the fear she had felt for the bear. This was a deep, primal recognition that set her very soul alight. Taking a courage she did not know she possessed, Holly slowly opened the cabin door. The cool night air washed over her, but she felt feverish. She stepped onto the porch, her bare feet gripping the rough wood. The wolf watched her, its ears twitching forward. She placed the bowl of stew on the step, her eyes never leaving the creature. "This is for you too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The wolf did not move for the food. Instead, it took one slow, deliberate step forward. Then another. The air around it began to shimmer, like heat rising from summer asphalt. A soft, golden light enveloped its form, and Holly watched, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. The massive wolf seemed to fold in on itself, its shape flowing, changing, rearranging. The fur receded, the powerful limbs lengthened and reshaped, the snout melted away. In a matter of heartbeats, where the great beast had stood, there was now a man. He was tall and powerfully built, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to carry the weight of the world. He wore simple, dark pants but no shirt, and his skin seemed to drink the moonlight. His hair was the same dark, messy nest as the boy's, and his eyes were the exact same shade of piercing, intelligent gray. This was Forrest. He was every bit as wild and formidable as his wolf, but there was a sharp, focused intelligence in his gaze that was entirely human. Holly could only stare, her hand flying to her mouth, her mind a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. Forrest did not advance on her. He stood his ground, his expression serious but not unkind. "Holly," he said, and his voice was a deep, resonant rumble like stones tumbling in a deep river. It was a voice that held both immense power and a surprising gentleness. You know my name?" she stammered, taking an involuntary step back. I have known much more than your name for a long time, he replied, his gaze steady. The boy you have been feeding. The one you call Ash. He is my son. The confession hung in the air between them. Holly's thoughts raced, connecting the impossible dots. Your son? But how? He's just a boy and you are. A werewolf, Forrest finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact. And so is Ash. Our pack has lived in these mountains, hidden and protecting this land, for generations longer than your town has existed. My son, he has always been a quiet child. After his mother was lost to us, he became more withdrawn. He was drawn to your light, to your kindness. He felt safe with you in a way he has not felt with anyone outside the pack in a very long time. I allowed him to come, but I was always watching. I have been watching you every night, Holly. I have seen your patience, your gentle heart, the way you cared for a strange, silent boy without asking for anything in return. Holly leaned against the doorframe for support, her legs feeling weak. The bond, the feeling in my chest, what is it? Forrest took a single step closer, and the warm pull intensified, making her breath catch. It is the mate bond, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, husky tone. It is a magic as old as the first wolf. It is the soul of my wolf recognizing its other half. My wolf knew you were ours from the very first night it saw you. It has been calling to you, and what you feel is your soul beginning to answer. He took another step, now standing at the bottom of her porch steps, looking up at her. The sheer power of him was overwhelming, yet the look in his eyes was one of raw, undisguised yearning. I have fought it. I told myself a human could never be part of our world. But every night, watching you, my resistance faded. Your courage facing the bear. Your unwavering kindness. You are the strongest person I have ever known. He reached out, his hand pausing in the space between them, asking for permission. Slowly, hesitantly, Holly nodded. His fingers, warm and calloused, gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure, undiluted sensation through her entire body. It felt like coming home. My wolf has chosen you, Forrest whispered, his gray eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive light. My heart has chosen you. You are mine, Holly. I claim you as my mate. You belong with me, with Ash, with our pack. You belong to this forest as it now belongs to you. The word claim should have felt demanding, a taking. But from his lips, with his hand still cupping her face with a tenderness that belied his strength, it felt like a vow. It felt like a promise of safety, of a belonging deeper than any she had ever known. The fear that had gripped her since the night before finally, completely melted away, replaced by a surge of something new, something bold and bright and terrifyingly wonderful. She looked into the eyes of the Wolf King, her own heart answering a call she now understood, and for the first time she did not pull away. The journey into the heart of the Blackwood Forest was a passage into another world. Walking beside Forrest, Holly felt the eyes of the ancient trees upon her, but the fear that once would have chilled her blood was now a distant memory. The warm, humming bond in her chest was a constant comfort, a glowing thread leading her forward, tied securely to the powerful man at her side. He moved with an innate grace, his every step silent and sure, a king in his domain. He did not speak much, but his presence was a language all its own, a protective, solid force that made her feel safer than any locked door ever had. They walked for what felt like miles, following hidden paths only his eyes could see, until the trees began to thin and the air itself seemed to change, growing warmer and carrying the faint, welcoming scent of wood smoke and baking bread. Suddenly, the forest opened up into a wide, sheltered clearing, nestled in the lap of the mountains. It was not a wild, untamed place but a village. Cottages crafted of stone and dark, polished wood dotted the landscape, their windows glowing with soft, golden light. The air was filled with the sounds of life, children's laughter echoing, the rhythmic chop of an axe, the low murmur of voices. This was the secret heart of the pack, a world within a world. As Holly and Forrest stepped into the open, every sound ceased. Dozens of faces turned toward them, their expressions a mixture of sharp curiosity, open suspicion, and wary assessment. They were all tall, strong people with eyes that held a wild, perceptive light. They were watching the human their alpha had brought home. Forrest's hand found the small of Holly's back, a simple, possessive gesture that sent a clear, unspoken message to everyone watching. He did not flinch or hesitate. "This is Holly," he announced, his deep voice carrying easily across the clearing, leaving no room for argument. "My claimed mate. She is under my protection and the protection of this pack." His words were a shield, but Holly knew a shield could not stop whispered doubts or cold shoulders. The first test had begun. A small figure then darted from behind one of the cottages and hurtled toward them. It was Ash. He skidded to a stop in front of Holly, his usual solemnity replaced by a bright, hopeful expression. He didn't say a word, but he looked from her to his father and back again, a small, genuine smile gracing his features for the first time. He then reached out and timidly took her hand, his small, cool fingers wrapping around hers. It was the final, silent seal of his approval, and it meant more to Holly in that moment than any grand proclamation. Forrest looked down at his son, and the fierce pride and love in his eyes was so potent it stole Holly's breath. Life in the pack was a whirlwind of new rhythms and unspoken rules. Holly was given her own small cottage next to Forrest's larger home, a cozy space with a thick fur rug and a window that looked out toward the sacred mountains. Forrest was a patient if intense teacher. He showed her the hidden streams where the pack fished, the meadows where the children learned to shift for the first time, and the great fire pit at the center of the village where stories were told under the stars. Their romance did not bloom with shy glances and whispered sweet nothings. It unfolded with the raw, honest intensity of the wild itself. Forrest's touch was always firm and certain, a brand of possession that set her blood on fire. He would often simply stand close to her, his heat seeping into her, his low voice explaining their ways, his gaze promising so much more than words ever could. It was a mature, consuming passion, built on a foundation of a deep, soul-level recognition that left no room for doubt. The challenge, when it came, was from a young woman named Sable. She was beautiful, with a fierce light in her eyes and a confident stance that spoke of a high rank within the pack. It was clear to everyone that she had hoped to one day be the one standing at Forrest's side. She never openly defied Forrest, but her subtle cruelties were a constant thorn. She would accidentally jostle Holly in the food line, her comments about fragile humans were always just loud enough to hear, and her followers would often fall into a pointed silence whenever Holly walked by. Holly bore it with a quiet dignity, not wanting to cause trouble, but the isolation began to wear on her. The breaking point came during a pack gathering. A large, heavy water skin meant for Holly was mishandled by one of Sable's friends, drenching Holly and drawing a wave of snickers. Forrest was across the clearing in an instant. He did not shout. He did not need to. The air around him seemed to crackle with a suppressed power that made every wolf lower their eyes. He looked directly at Sable, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet tone that was more frightening than any roar. "You will show respect to my mate," he stated, each word a hammer blow. "The next wolf who shows her even a moment of disrespect will answer to me directly. She is my heart. To harm her is to harm me. To challenge her place is to challenge my authority as your alpha. Is that understood?" The silence that followed was absolute. Sable, her face pale, gave a stiff nod and retreated. In that moment, Forrest had not just defended her. He had elevated her. He had made it clear that her place was not something to be earned from the pack, but something that came directly from him, irrevocable and absolute. From that day on, the pack's attitude shifted. The wary suspicion melted into a slow, genuine acceptance. The women began to show Holly how to weave with special grasses. The men included her in their tales of the hunt. She was no longer just Forrest's human, she was becoming part of the tapestry of the pack. She found her purpose in the simple, profound acts of caring for Ash, of learning their ways, of standing beside Forrest as he led his people. She was his sanctuary and he was her strength. On a night when the moon was a perfect, luminous pearl in the sky, Holly stood with Forrest and Ash on a high cliff overlooking the village. The world was bathed in silver, and the bond in her chest was a steady, warm hum, a song of pure contentment. Ash, in his small wolf form, leaned against her legs with a happy sigh. Forrest's strong arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her head. She looked out at the sleeping village, at the dark, protective forest, and up at the man who was her destiny. The quiet woman in the lonely cabin was gone. In her place was the mate of the alpha, a protector, a mother to a wonderful boy, and a beloved member of a wild, wonderful family. She had not just been claimed, she had finally, completely come home. If you felt the pull of the mate bond and want to journey deeper into the world of werewolves, fated lovers, and epic romances, make sure to subscribe to the channel. New tales of heart-pounding passion and unforgettable destiny are waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss a single one. Your next favorite story is just a click away.